She destroyed a werewolf king's car, left a note in the snow, and walked away. But here's what nobody knew. That single piece of paper would mark her as his fated mate and pull her into a world where monsters were real and she was far more powerful than anyone expected. This is the story of Mary Thompson, a shy girl whose one honest mistake revealed a destiny centuries in the making. What happened next wasn't just life-changing. It was world-shattering. And it all started with a scratch, a snowstorm, and a choice that most people would never make. Are you ready? Before we continue, season greeting from Wolf Tales family to all my wonderful supporters. Thank you for the love and support this year. Wishing you peace, joy, and many more great stories ahead. I've noticed that many of you enjoy watching my videos but haven't subscribed yet. Please help support and grow this channel by liking the video, dropping a comment, and subscribing if you enjoy the stories. Thank you so much. Now, let's get back to the story. Snow fell like frozen bullets that Wednesday evening, blanketing the forgotten parking lot behind Thornwood Books in white silence. Mary clutched her steering wheel with trembling hands, breath fogging the windshield, her shift having run late because Mrs. Patterson needed help finding the perfect mystery novel for her grandson. She was 24 years old, living on minimum wage, and always stayed as long as customers needed because being helpful meant being invisible, and invisible meant safe. Her ancient Honda groaned into reverse in the cramped, poorly lit lot. Then it happened. Metal screamed against metal, a sound that made her stomach plummet through the floor. The gleaming black Mercedes beside her now bore a jagged, angry scratch along its pristine driver's side, her rusty car door the obvious culprit. Her breath caught completely. No security cameras watched this forgotten corner. No witnesses stood in the heavy snowfall. The storm would cover her tire tracks within minutes. She could drive away right now, disappear into the winter night, and no one would ever connect her to this damage. But this shy girl's hands were already shaking as she reached for her bag. Her mother's voice echoed through her memory, the mother who died 2 years ago, leaving Mary completely alone in a world that felt too sharp and too loud. Character is who you are when no one is watching, sweetheart. It's about the person you become in the dark when nobody will ever know what you chose. With frozen fingers, she tore a receipt from her wallet and scribbled through tears that blurred her vision and burned her cold cheeks. I accidentally scratched your car. I don't have much money, but I will take full responsibility. I'm so sorry. Mary Thompson, and she added her phone number with digits that wavered like her courage. She folded the note carefully, her heart pounding so violently she thought it might crack her ribs, and tucked it under the windshield wiper. Then she walked back to her car on legs weak as water, certain this principle her mother had taught her was about to cost her everything she'd worked for. She had $287 in her bank account. This car probably cost more than she'd earned in a year. What Mary didn't know, what she couldn't possibly have known, was that Daniel James, the enigmatic 32-year-old alpha king who everyone in the supernatural world feared, had just stepped out of the shadows. He stood beneath the bookstore's back awning, phone pressed to his ear, managing a territorial dispute between two pack members, when something made him freeze mid-sentence. A scent, vanilla, old paper, and something wild, something that called to the wolf inside him with an intensity that stole his breath. His eyes tracked the source. A woman in a worn coat, moving with the careful invisibility of someone who'd learned that being noticed meant pain. She was tucking something under his windshield wiper. His car. His Mercedes. The vehicle he'd parked in this obscure lot specifically because he was meeting with a bookstore owner about a property acquisition, and he preferred his business dealings private. He ended the call without explanation and moved through the falling snow with the silence only a predator could manage. Pulled the note free with gloved hands. Read it once. Read it again. Snowflakes catching on the paper. For the first time since becoming alpha, since he'd accepted the weight of his crown and the loneliness of his position, Something cracked inside Daniel's chest. This raw, vulnerable act of honesty was so rare in his world of pack politics and territorial warfare that it seemed almost impossible. In a society where power was everything and weakness was death, this human girl had chosen integrity over escape. The wolf in him recognized her instantly.
Mate.
The word reverberated through his bones with absolute certainty. He stood there in the snow, staring at those handwritten words, and felt something he'd stopped believing in, hope that the moon goddess hadn't forgotten him after all. He slipped the note carefully into his inside pocket, next to his heart, and watched her drive away in a vehicle that probably shouldn't be on the road. Golden eyes tracked her taillights until they disappeared into the storm. The faintest smile touched his lips, an expression his pack hadn't seen in years. He needed to know everything about this Mary Thompson. But in a world built on dominance and betrayal, would she survive long enough for him to claim her? Or would his enemies tear her apart first? The bookstore hummed with quiet activity. Pages whispered as they turned. The coffee machine gurgled its familiar rhythm. Mary stood behind the register, barely breathing, reorganizing the same shelf of bookmarks for the third time, waiting for her phone to ring with an angry voice demanding payment for the damage. But no one called. Not that evening. Not the next morning. By noon the following day, she'd half convinced herself the owner hadn't checked their car yet. Maybe she had one more day before her world collapsed. What she couldn't see was Daniel standing in his corner office at James Corporate Holdings, holding that crumpled note up to the winter light streaming through floor-to-ceiling windows. He'd already made 3 calls, one to his head of security for a full background check, one to his CFO about acquiring the building where she worked, and one to his second-in-command about a woman who might be more important than any treaty or territory. He could have confronted her immediately, demanded payment, used his considerable power to make an example of her carelessness. Instead, he pressed the intercom on his desk. "Victoria, come see me." Victoria Sterling appeared within seconds, heels clicking sharply against hardwood. She was 29, beautiful in a calculated, predatory way, and desperately wanted to be chosen as Daniel's mate, though he'd made it clear the decision wasn't his to make. Fate decided such things. She smiled with practiced warmth that never reached her cold eyes. Mary's hands wouldn't stop shaking during the entire drive to her apartment, through her restless sleep, and all the next morning as she unlocked Thornwood Books an hour before opening. The familiar scent of aging paper and vanilla candles usually calmed her, but today her stomach remained twisted in knots. She'd damaged a car that probably cost more than 3 years of her salary. The owner would call. They would demand payment. She would lose everything. She moved through her morning routine like a ghost, starting the coffee maker, arranging the new releases display, updating the recommendation cards she handwrote for customers because Mr. Thornwood believed in the personal touch. Her phone sat on the counter beside the register, silent and accusatory. Every time it buzzed with a spam call, her heart lurched. By late afternoon, the familiar rhythm of work had almost steadied her nerves. Almost. Then the bell above the door chimed, and Mary glanced up to offer her standard greeting. The words died in her throat. The man who entered didn't belong in her world. His charcoal suit, dark hair swept back from a face that could have been carved from stone, all sharp angles and controlled power. But it was his eyes that made her breath catch. Amber. Almost gold in the bookstore's warm lighting. They swept the space with predatory precision before landing on her with an intensity that made her want to hide behind the counter. She forced herself to smile, to pretend her hands weren't trembling again. "Welcome to Thornwood Books. Can I help you find something?" He didn't answer, just moved deeper into the store with movements too fluid, too silent for someone his size. Mary's skin prickled with inexplicable awareness as he browsed the shelves, and she couldn't shake the feeling that he wasn't really looking at books at all. 20 minutes later, a young boy burst through the door, his frazzled mother trailing behind. "I need a book about dragons. the child announced with absolute certainty. Real ones, not baby stories. Mary smiled genuinely for the first time that day and stepped from behind the counter. This she could do. This was safe. I know exactly what you need, she said, her voice soft but steady as she led him to the fantasy section. She didn't notice the way the man in the expensive suit had positioned himself where he could watch her every movement. Daniel James stood perfectly still, his wolf clawing beneath his skin, as this trembling human girl transformed before his eyes. With the child, her anxiety melted away. She knelt to the boy's level, pulling books with careful reverence, her face animated as she described dragons and quests and heroes who were afraid but brave anyway. Her scent intensified, vanilla and paper and that wild thing she didn't understand she carried. Moon-touched. The word whispered through his consciousness. The mate bond hummed between them like a living wire, though she clearly felt nothing. She apologized when she bumped the bookshelf. Apologized when her voice got too enthusiastic. Apologized for existing in a space she had every right to occupy. Daniel's jaw tightened. He'd commanded pacts, negotiated treaties, killed challengers without hesitation. But watching this fragile human girl who'd chosen honesty over escape, who glowed when sharing her love of stories, who smelled like coming home, he had absolutely no idea what to do with her. The moon goddess had a twisted sense of humor. Or perhaps, Daniel thought as Mary's laugh rang through the bookstore like silver bells, she knew exactly what she was doing. He purchased a book he'd never read and left without speaking to her. But he'd be back. First, he needed to understand how to approach a mate who would run screaming if she knew what he really was. The call came 3 days later, just as Mary was convincing herself that maybe, miraculously, the car's owner had decided not to pursue it. Her phone buzzed during her lunch break, an unknown number glowing on the screen. Her sandwich turned to ash in her mouth. Hello. Her voice came out smaller than she intended. Miss Thompson. The voice on the other end was deep, controlled, with an edge that made her spine straighten instinctively. This is Daniel James. I believe you left me a note regarding my vehicle. Mary's heart plummeted. Yes. I'm so sorry. I take full responsibility. I can set up a payment plan, or I'd like to discuss this in person. His tone wasn't angry. Somehow that made it worse. Are you available tomorrow? There's a coffee shop near your bookstore.
Crescent Cafe.
10 o'clock. It wasn't really a question. Mary agreed, because what choice did she have, and spent the next 20 hours imagining every worst-case scenario her anxious brain could conjure. She arrived 15 minutes early, ordering the cheapest item on the menu with hands that wouldn't stay steady. When Daniel James walked through the door at exactly 10 o'clock, the entire cafe seemed to shrink around his presence. He was even more devastating in daylight, tall enough that he had to duck slightly through the doorway, moving with a predator's grace that made her primitive hindbrain whisper danger even as her traitorous body leaned forward. Miss Thompson. He slid into the seat across from her, and suddenly the small table felt impossibly intimate. Thank you for meeting me. Of course. I mean, I owe you, she was rambling. Stop rambling. I have about $300 saved. I know that won't cover it, but I can pay you monthly, or I could work off the debt somehow, or... Mary. The way he said her name, low and careful, made her words dry up completely. I'm not here about the money. She blinked. You're not. I'm here because in a world where most people would have fled, you stayed. You left a note. You took responsibility. His amber eyes held hers with an intensity that made her skin flush. That interests me far more than a scratch on a car. The air between them felt charged, electric. Mary couldn't look away, even though every instinct screamed that she was drowning in water too deep for her. He watched her like she was the only person in the room, in the world, and she had no idea what to do with that kind of attention. I don't understand, she whispered. Daniel's jaw tightened, a muscle flexing as though he was fighting some internal battle. His wolf was roaring at him to reach across the table, to touch her, to mark her as is so every supernatural creature within 50 miles would know she was claimed. But the fear in her eyes, the way she held herself like she might shatter, he forced the beast down with brutal control. "The scratch is nothing," he said finally, "but your honesty is rare. I'd like to get to know you better if you're willing." Mary's mind spun. Was this man, this overwhelming, intense, impossibly attractive man, actually asking her out? That couldn't be right. People like him didn't notice people like her. Outside the cafe window, a woman in a designer suit and heels like weapons stopped mid-stride on the sidewalk. Victoria Sterling's manicured hands clenched into fists as she watched Daniel lean toward the plain little human in her worn coat, watched him smile, actually smile, in a way he'd never smiled at her in 5 years of loyal service to his pack. Victoria's phone was in her hand before she consciously decided to move. This wouldn't stand. The Alpha King didn't belong with a weak, pathetic human who probably couldn't even survive her first pack gathering. If Daniel wouldn't see reason, Victoria would simply have to remove the problem herself. The complaints started small. A customer insisting Mary had been rude when she knew she'd been nothing but polite. Mr. Thornwood showing her a scathing online review claiming she'd recommended the wrong book deliberately. Her landlord calling about noise violations at 2 a.m. when she'd been asleep, alone, in complete silence. "I don't understand," Mary told her reflection in the bathroom mirror, dark circles blooming under her eyes. "I don't understand what's happening." But it kept happening. A shelf in the bookstore's back room collapsed as she walked beneath it, would have crushed her skull if strong hands hadn't yanked her backward at the last second. She'd spun to find Daniel James standing there, his amber eyes blazing with something fierce and protective, his grip on her arms almost painful in its intensity. "Are you hurt?" His voice was rough, urgent. "How did you?" She looked around the empty back room. "How did you even know I was here?" He'd released her like she'd burned him, stepping back with visible effort. "I was nearby. Lucky timing." But the way he looked at the collapsed shelf, at the brackets that had been clearly tampered with, suggested he didn't believe in luck at all. 2 days later, her car wouldn't start. The mechanic's face had gone pale when he checked under the hood. "Your brake line's been cut clean through. You're lucky you didn't drive this. You could have been killed." Mary sat in the garage's waiting room, hands shaking, trying to figure out who would want to hurt her. She was nobody. Invisible. Safe in her invisibility. When Daniel's sleek Mercedes pulled into the garage parking lot, she almost laughed at the impossibility of it. "Let me guess," she said when he approached. "You were nearby?" Something flickered in his eyes. Guilt, maybe. Or something darker. "I'm beginning to think you need someone watching out for you." She should have been afraid of him. This man who appeared every time disaster struck, who looked at her like she was precious and breakable and his. Instead, she found herself accepting his offer of a ride, found herself noticing how his presence made her feel safer even as her logical mind screamed that coincidences didn't work this way. That night, the dreams began. Wolves running through snow-covered forests, their howls harmonizing with something ancient and wild. She could feel the cold earth beneath paws that weren't hers, taste the night air sharp with pine and promises. In the dreams, she understood their language, the complex hierarchy, the bonds that tied pack to pack, the way power thrummed through their blood like electricity. She woke gasping, tangled in sheets damp with sweat, knowing things she shouldn't know. Like the woman watching her apartment building from across the street. Mary couldn't see her from her 4th-floor window, but she knew. Victoria Sterling stood in the shadows, and her hatred was a living thing that Mary could somehow taste on her tongue. Mary grabbed her phone with trembling hands. She should call the police. Should call anyone but him. She called Daniel. "There's someone watching my building," she whispered when he answered on the first ring, as though he'd been waiting. "I know that sounds crazy, but I can feel." "Lock your door. Don't leave. I'm coming." The line went dead. Mary stood in her dark apartment, heart pounding, wondering when her quiet life had become a nightmare. Wondering why her skin still tingled where Daniel had touched her. Wondering why she dreamed of golden eyes in the darkness, watching her with hunger that should have terrified her, but didn't. The parking garage was nearly empty when Mary finished her evening shift, her footsteps echoing off concrete walls that suddenly felt too close, too dark. She'd made it 3 steps toward her rental car when every nerve in her body screamed danger.
Run.
She didn't question it, didn't pause to look around. She turned and sprinted back toward the stairwell, her heart hammering against her ribs. Behind her, she heard the screech of tires, voices shouting, the slam of car doors. She burst through the stairwell door just as Daniel's Mercedes skidded to a stop at the entrance ramp, blocking the path of the 2 black SUVs that had been seconds from cornering her. What happened next was a blur. Daniel's hand on her arm, guiding her into his car with barely controlled urgency. The way his eyes blazed gold, actually gold, in the dim light. The drive to an estate outside the city that looked like something from a fairy tale, all stone and iron gates and woods that pressed close on every side. "You need to know the truth," Daniel said, leading her into a study lined with books that smelled older than the building itself. "And you're going to think I'm insane." "I already think you're insane," Mary shot back, her fear translating to anger because anger was safer. "You're stalking me. Those men were trying to hurt me because of you, weren't they?" "Yes." His honesty startled her. "Because of what you are to me. Because of what I am." And then he told her. Werewolves.
Packs.
Territories. An entire hidden world existing alongside humanity. Mate bonds written in fate and blood, recognized by scent and soul. He told her she was his, destined, chosen, marked by the moon goddess herself. Mary listened with her arms wrapped tight around herself, her rational mind rejecting every impossible word even as something deep in her chest recognized the truth of it. The dreams. The knowing. The way her body responded to his presence, like iron to a magnet. "Stop." Her voice cracked. "Just stop. This is insane. You're either crazy or you think I'm stupid enough to believe." "Mary, take me home." She stood on legs that barely supported her.
"Now."
"Or I'm calling the police and telling them you've kidnapped me." The pain that flashed across his face almost broke her resolve. Almost. He drove her home in silence, and she didn't look back as she fled into her building, even though every cell in her body screamed at her to turn around, to go back to him, to accept what he'd offered. She made it to midnight before her world shattered completely. The howl cut through the night, not a dog, not quite a wolf, something in between, and impossibly close. Mary rushed to her window and looked down at the street below. A man stood beneath the streetlight, his body convulsing, bones cracking and reforming in ways that shouldn't be possible. She watched him drop to all fours, watched for a ripple across skin, watched him become something out of nightmare and myth. Another wolf, sleek and dark, appeared from the alley, nudging the transformed one with obvious concern. An emergency. Someone hurt. The wolves disappeared into the darkness with supernatural speed. Mary's phone was in her hand before she could think. Daniel answered on the first ring. "Show me." Her voice was barely a whisper, broken and awed and terrified. "Show me what you really are." The line was quiet for 3 heartbeats. Then, "I'm outside your building. Come down." She went. The world looked different now that Mary knew what lived in the shadows. She saw them everywhere. The barista whose eyes flashed amber when annoyed, the jogger in the park who moved too fast, too fluid, The city was full of wolves pretending to be human, and Mary could sense every single one. It started as a prickling at the base of her skull. A knowing. She'd turn a corner and understand, seconds before seeing him, that a werewolf was near. Their emotions hit her like weather fronts, dominance like heat, submission like cool rain, aggression like lightning about to strike. "It's getting stronger," she told Daniel in his study, wrapping her hands around a mug of tea she couldn't drink. "I can feel them. All of them. Is that normal?" The look he exchanged with his second-in-command made her stomach drop. "No," Daniel said carefully. "It's not." The pack meeting was supposed to be simple. Daniel introducing his mate to the council, a formality to legitimize their bond. Mary sat beside him in a room full of predators wearing human skin, their eyes tracking her every nervous movement. Victoria stood near the back, her hatred a jagged thing that scraped against Mary's consciousness. "She's human," one of the council members said, the word dripping with disdain.
Weak.
Unsuitable for a Luna. Mary's fear spiked, flooding through her like ice water. And suddenly the room changed. Wolves who'd been standing dropped to one knee. Others bent their heads, necks exposed in instinctive submission. Even Daniel tensed beside her, fighting the overwhelming urge to submit to something he couldn't name. The fear wasn't just Mary's anymore. It was everyone's. "Impossible," someone whispered. An elderly woman pushed through the chaos, her silver hair catching the light. Elder Miriam. Her eyes were wide with recognition and something like grief. "Moon's singer," she breathed. "By the goddess, I never thought I'd see another." The room erupted in whispers. Daniel's hand found Mary's, grounding her as the elder explained what she was. Moon's singers. Rare humans with dormant werewolf ancestry, capable of sensing and influencing wolf emotions. Hunted to near extinction by alphas who feared their power, who saw them as threats rather than gifts. "There was one before," Elder Miriam said softly, her gaze moving to Daniel. "Your father's mate. She was murdered before their bond could complete." She turned to Mary. "What was your mother's name, child?" "Sarah," Mary whispered. "Sarah Collins before she married my father. She died in a car accident when I was 22. The elder's face crumpled. "Not an accident. Never an accident. Sarah was a moon singer. She was meant to be Luna of the Northern Pack. But there were those who feared what she represented, who believed humans, even gifted ones, had no place in our world." Mary couldn't breathe. Her mother. Her gentle mother, who taught her about character and kindness and doing the right thing even when it was hard. Murdered. Assassinated because of what she was. What Mary was.
Who?
The word came out hard, sharp, nothing like her usual trembling voice. Who killed her? Elder Miriam's eyes drifted to Victoria, whose face had gone pale. Her father, Marcus Sterling. He led the faction that rejected human mates. He died in challenge combat with Daniel's father years ago, but his daughter. Victoria fled the room before anyone could stop her. Mary stood, something fierce and ancient unfurling in her chest. Her mother had died for being kind, for being gifted, for falling in love with the wrong man. Mary had spent her whole life apologizing for existing, making herself small and invisible and safe. She was done hiding. The blood moon would rise in 3 days, and the estate had transformed into a fortress. Warriors arrived from outlying territories, their presence filling the grounds with barely contained power. Mary felt them all, their curiosity, their skepticism, their hope. Some remembered her mother, and their grief tasted like smoke on her tongue. Sarah used to sing to the pups. An older wolf named Marcus told her, his eyes distant with memory. She wasn't afraid of us. Not even when we shifted. She'd sit in the grass and hum, and every wolf within earshot would calm. We loved her. Most of us did. Most. Not all. And the ones who hadn't had killed her for it. Victoria's challenge came at dawn on the second day, delivered through a formal courier. She invoked ancient right, a public contestation of the Luna's worthiness before the assembled packs. Mary had to prove herself or step aside. "You don't have to accept," Daniel said, his voice tight with barely leashed fury. "I can refuse the challenge. Exile her. And look weak before every pack in the region?" Mary shook her head, surprised by her own steadiness. "She's counting on you protecting me. She wants to prove I'm a liability." Daniel's second-in-command, a scarred warrior named Cole, studied Mary with new respect. "The girl has teeth. Good. She'll need them." They trained her in the courtyard as wolves gathered to watch. Not physical combat. She'd lose that in seconds. Instead, Cole taught her to weaponize what she was. "Your fear can make them submit," he explained, circling her like prey. "But fear is the weakest emotion. What else can you project?" Mary closed her eyes, remembering her mother's voice, her mother's courage. She thought of Daniel's protection, of the wolves who'd loved Sarah Collins, of the fierce thing growing inside her that refused to apologize anymore. She pushed that feeling outward, confidence, belonging, strength. Cole stumbled, catching himself against a pillar. Around the courtyard, wolves straightened, their eyes brightening with something like hope. "By the goddess," Cole breathed. "She's a weapon." "She's my mate," Daniel corrected, his voice rough with pride and possessiveness. "And anyone who threatens her answers to me." But the real threat came from outside. Shadow Ridge scouts were spotted at the territory borders, their alpha known for seizing opportunities during gatherings when pack protocols demanded restraint. Marcus's intelligence network reported whispers of an alliance. Victoria had offered them information, weaknesses, the promise of chaos. The night before the blood moon, Mary stood at Daniel's side as old pack members came to pay respects. They brought her mother's favorite flowers, told stories of her kindness, her strength. An elderly woman pressed a pendant into Mary's palm, a silver moon on a delicate chain. "This was Sarah's," she whispered. "She'd want you to have it." Mary fastened it around her neck, feeling the weight of legacy and loss. The blood moon rose like a wound in the sky, painting everything crimson. In the distance, carried on the wind, came howls that didn't belong to the northern pack. Shadow Ridge. Coming early. Coming armed. Daniel's hand found hers as warriors took positions around the gathering grounds. "Stay close to me," he commanded, his eyes already bleeding to gold. "Whatever happens, stay close." But Mary could feel Victoria's satisfaction like poison in the air, could sense the approaching wolves and their hunger for violence. The battle was coming, and she would be at its center whether Daniel wanted her there or not. The Shadow Ridge Alpha struck during the ceremonial moon greeting, when protocol demanded all wolves stand witness rather than fight. Chaos erupted as enemy wolves poured through the tree line, their howls shattering the sacred gathering. Daniel shifted mid-stride, his massive black wolf form meeting the attacking alpha in a collision of fur and fangs that shook the ground. Mary stood frozen for 3 heartbeats, feeling the northern pack's terror spike around her like shattered glass. Pups huddled near their parents. Young wolves looked to their elders for guidance and found only panic. This was slaughter, not battle. Then she felt Victoria moving through the chaos, felt her murderous intent focused like a blade. Mary turned just as Victoria lunged, claws extended, eyes wild with desperate hatred. "You should have stayed invisible," Victoria snarled. Something inside Mary shattered, or perhaps it finally, fully awakened. Power flooded through her veins like moonlight made solid. When she spoke, her voice carried weight that made every wolf within hearing freeze. "Stop." Victoria's body locked mid-strike, trembling with the effort to resist. Around them, Shadow Ridge wolves stumbled, suddenly drowning in primal fear that wasn't their own. Mary pushed it into them. The terror of prey, of being hunted, of facing something ancient and unstoppable. But to Daniel's pack, she sensed something different.
Come.
Courage. The bone-deep certainty that they were protected, that their Luna stood with them, that they would survive this night. The young wolves stopped cowering. Warriors found their footing. The tide of battle shifted in heartbeats. Daniel's jaws closed around the Shadow Ridge Alpha's throat. The challenge ended with brutal finality. When he shifted back to human form, blood-spattered and breathing hard, his eyes found Mary immediately. She stood in the center of the gathering grounds, Victoria still frozen before her, and every wolf, friend and foe, watching with a mixture of awe and terror. Exile, Daniel's voice rang out. Victoria Sterling, for treason and attempted murder of the Luna, you are cast out. You have until dawn to leave our territory. Return, and you will be executed. Victoria crumpled when Mary released her, fleeing into the darkness, without looking back. The remaining Shadow Ridge wolves surrendered, and Mary, who'd spent her life apologizing for existing, stood before the assembled packs and felt their acceptance wash over her like rainfall. 3 weeks later, Daniel stood in his garage, running his fingers over the scratch on his Mercedes. The car had been detailed, repaired, made perfect again, except for that one jagged line he'd specifically ordered them to preserve. "Are you sure about the plaque?" Mary asked, leaning against his shoulder as he mounted the small brass plate beside the scratch. "Where it all began," Daniel read aloud, then turned to pull her close. "Absolutely sure. Some scars are worth keeping." Mary's bookstore had a new sign, "Thornwood Books, all welcome." Humans browsed beside wolves now, and if some customers noticed the others moved with unusual grace or had unnaturally bright eyes, no one commented. It was the first integration point between worlds, and Mary stood behind her register feeling like she'd finally found her purpose. On a cold Saturday morning, she visited the cemetery alone. She laid her mother's favorite flowers on the grave and knelt in the grass, touching the silver moon pendant at her throat. "You were right, Mom," she whispered. "Character is who you are when no one is watching. And I'm watching now. I'm finally watching." She paused, feeling the winter sun on her face, the wedding band on her finger, the pack bonds humming in her chest. "I hope you're proud. I hope you know your daughter became exactly who you raised her to be, someone who faces the darkness and chooses kindness anyway. Someone who doesn't apologize for being powerful." The wind rustled through bare branches, and somewhere in the distance a wolf howled. Mary smiled and walked back toward her future, her pack, her mate, no longer invisible, no longer afraid. Some stories begin with destruction, but the best ones begin with a choice to do what's right, even when no one is watching, especially then. If you enjoyed this story and want more like it, please like the video, drop a comment, and subscribe to the channel. Your support truly means the world to me and helps this channel